The Chevy El Camino is one of the most iconic cars on American roads, a vehicle combining the utility of a truck and the performance of a muscle car. So why wasn't the SSR able to replicate the same success? Let's find out why as we dig into the history of both vehicles. While the Chevy El Camino is perhaps the most remembered coupe utility vehicle, the design actually dates back to decades prior. The story goes that an Australian farmer wrote to Ford requesting, quote, "a vehicle to go to church in on Sunday, and which can carry our pigs to market on Mondays." So in July of 1934, Ford released a coupe utility version of its V8 model, and thus a new car body style was born. General Motors would follow suit, releasing a coupe utility vehicle of their own just 2 months later. While these models were designed for the Australian market, Americans would have to wait a few more years until Studebaker released the Coupe Express in 1937 stateside. Despite this, the El Camino is still generally the image that most people conjure up when thinking of a coupe utility. However, the Ford Ranchero actually predates the El Camino by about 2 years.
Look, it's more than a car. Look again, it's more than a truck. It's the new Ford Ranchero.
The Ranchero debuted in 1957, with the El Camino being GM's response in 1959. Both featured Spanish names, with the rumor being that the name El Camino comes from the El Camino Real, a trail in California that would later become State Route 82. Dodge would also briefly enter the coupe utility segment in the 80s.
It's a car.
It's a truck.
It drives like a car.
It hauls like a truck.
Selling the less successful Rampage for 3 model years. While the El Camino was initially popular, sales declined quite quickly, leading to GM axing it only 2 model years after its introduction. It wasn't until 1964, when a Chevelle-based El Camino was released, that the El Camino really took off. Throughout the El Camino's life, a slew of performance-oriented models were available, starting with the first SS variant in 1969. Sales then peaked in 1973. Shortly after, however, new emissions regulations led many automakers to focus on more fuel-efficient vehicles, which was the beginning of the end for the El Camino. For its final few years, production moved to Mexico.
Well, it's my first trip to Mexico, and, I was thinking maybe you might have something a little more...
Mexican?
Yeah,
How would you like an El Camino?
Ooh, I like that. That's good, yeah. Yeah, man. El Camino.
The El Camino has also been a popular car in cinema, further cementing its iconic status. Features prominently in action movies and even got its own movie eventually, the eponymous Breaking Bad spin-off. The El Camino was sold until 1987, when it was more or less replaced by the S10, though it did outlast the Ford Ranchero's production by 8 years. Nevertheless, the coupe utility remains a controversial body type for a vehicle. Some say that it combines the practicality of a pickup with the driving dynamics of a car, while others argue that it lacks the payload and towing capacity of a true truck, while only offering room for 2 to 3 occupants in its single cab. In spite of this, the El Camino is just so undeniably cool. However, the same can't be said of the SSR, with its cutesy retro styling. SSR stands for Super Sport Roadster, and it came around a time when automakers were experimenting with retro designs, like the Ford Thunderbird and Plymouth Prowler. The idea was to attract former fans of these types of vehicles who had now grown older and had disposable income to spend on their dream car. Unfortunately, these vehicles, and especially the SSR, weren't able to lure in buyers who were more enticed by the prospect of owning a restored classic of the real thing.
To round out the customer profile, SSR buyers are expected to range in age from 35 to 50 and to be 60% male, college educated, and have a median income of $130,000. They are certainly product knowledgeable. and they have little fear when it comes to adopting early most things that are new in terms of style and cool. The SSR buyer can easily be described as image conscious, upscale, and opinion leaders.
The SSR customer is typically someone that's very enthusiastic about products, but they like more of a look-at-me style than something that's pure performance.
The SSR debuted as a concept at the 2000 Detroit Auto Show. Its appearance is based on the Chevy Advanced Design trucks of the 1940s. Unlike previous coupe utilities, the SSR featured a retractable roof and covered bed, which limited the truck-like abilities of its predecessors. A powerful V8 engine producing 300 horsepower wasn't enough to make the SSR feel quick, needing 7.7 seconds to propel the 4,700-pound car to 60 miles an hour. The platform's odd weight distribution contributed to poor handling as well. Most examples sold in the mid-$40,000 range, which was a poor value for what was being offered. Fans of retro designs could get a Volkswagen Beetle or a Chrysler PT Cruiser for about half that price. Chevy promoted the car by having it featured as the pace car in the Indy 500 in 2003, as well as paying for it to be featured as product placement in the 2005 Michael Bay flop The Island. But this did little to persuade car buyers, with production ending in 2006 after only 4 model years. GM wasn't the only automaker to experiment with car-based trucks in this era either. Subaru had previously released their own coupe utility in the 70s, the Brat. It was much smaller than the El Camino, and earlier models featured jump seats mounted in the bed. Flash forward to 2002, and Subaru released the much more conventionally styled Baja, which resembled a legacy sedan with an open bed on the back. While Subaru's design was meant to be more functional than the SSR, featuring fold-down seats which opened up to the cabin, it still wasn't a sales success either. GM's biggest mistake was not using the coupe utility they already had, sold by GM's Australian subsidiary Holden. Starting in 2000, the Holden Ute was sold as a coupe utility version of the Holden Commodore, which was sold in the US as the Pontiac G8 and later as the Chevy SS. The Ute's overall structure is much more akin to that of the El Camino than the SSR, and is similarly based on an existing muscle car. The Ute sold well in Australia for 17 years, but sadly never made its way to the US. Today's car-based trucks feature smaller beds and larger cabs. The closest you'll get to an El Camino today is the Ford Maverick, with the Hyundai Santa Cruz being a close second. With the slow demise of coupes in general, particularly two-seaters, it's unlikely that the El Camino is going to come back anytime soon. And while the SSR was no El Camino, it has developed a minor cult following in the years since its demise. Most examples sell in the $30,000 range. However, reports indicate that one sold for as much as $60,000 in recent years, and a barn-find SSR sold on eBay for almost $50,000. Still though, well-maintained and restored El Caminos often go for much more, with the most expensive being a 1970 SS edition that fetched a whopping $275,000.